long time ago in junior college, I was a psych major. I know I probably told you I've had like 4 or 5 majors, and you're like, he's just making it up now. He's had like every major, but I have a degree in psychology, and that's what spiked my interest in linguistics, actually, that kind of fostered that uh, shift for me. But one thing that you study a lot in developmental psychology is the how children learn how to speak their first language, how human beings are able to develop and learn any language despite the fact that the input that they get is pretty poor. People make mistakes. They don't say every word, so how could you learn that? Anyway, one of the really popular stories that showed up in a lot of these textbooks is because it allowed psychologists a window into what was really going on in the mind at such a young stage, is these stories of excuse me, stories of very isolated children. After the fall of communism in Romania, the Ceausescu regime of communist Romania, they found that there were these just tons and tons of orphanages in Romania, and they were really overcrowded, and the staff just had little or no contact with these Romanian orphans. They wouldn't hold them, they wouldn't speak to them, and so they were literally just growing up as you would try to grow a potted plant. They would feed them, but other than that, there was zero human interaction. And you can read stories about these Romanian orphanages in the New York Times and other similar places. They're quite infamous. And what they found very quickly is that all of these children, through lack of stimulation, through lack of relationship, they actually were not stimulated to produce growth hormone. And so you had children who not only didn't speak at very advanced ages, they had no language abilities, but you had 15 and 20-year-old children that looked like they were 5 and 6 years old, like this child here, because they just had no growth hormone stimulated by relationship. Their IQs were severely below normal. Some of them even actually died from a lack of being held and spoken to. I've seen similar situations firsthand. Some of the time that I've been in Haiti, you're not allowed to take photos there, so I don't have any pictures of you, but you can imagine similar-looking children at places like the Mother Teresa Children's Special Hospital in Port-au-Prince. Every kid in these beds just like this just begs to be held as soon as you walk by. They crave human contact. And so you can clearly see from tragic stories like this that relationships, that interpersonal reaction, touch, speech, all of those things are critical to what makes us human. That these children, lacking those relationships and touch and speech and all of those things, began to lose some of the things that we would normally think of as making them human. They lost their ability to speak. They lost their ability to interact. Relationships are absolutely critical. They're built into who we are as human beings. And so you have, in the beginning of Genesis, God has created everything that there is, and he said that it's very good. And then what you get towards the end of chapter 2 is you get, for the first time in this paradise environment that God's made, perfectly tailor-made for the man, for the first time, God expresses an unmet need. And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to talk about the need. We're going to talk about how God provides for that need. And then we're going to talk about how that provision results in shalom, or restored peace and wholeness. So first of all, what is that need? That's where we're going. Need, provision, shalom. But what is that need? So in the passages that we read, we said that man is created male and female in the image of God, and yet in chapter 2, you've got Adam in the garden alone. Eve is not yet on the scene, and what task does God give him to do? Well, he's to name all of the animals, and he's doing that. He's doing his job. He's exercising dominion over all of these creatures as God commanded. To name something is to show that you have authority or power over it, and so he's naming all of the animals and exercising his authority over them, and yet it doesn't seem to be enough. And that's not Adam's opinion. That is God's estimation of things. Adam is solo. And so you have, in the end of chapter 2, this first instance in all of paradise. God has been saying, this is good, it's good, it's good. And then when he's created everything, it's very good. And now all of a sudden, in chapter 2, you have God saying, it is not good. That's a change. What is not good? Something is not good. Now, God is not saying that the situation of Adam being on his own is sinful or evil, but simply that it's incomplete. And so God, in his love, provides for Adam the best, the greater fullness of his unfolding plan. You know, we joke around and we call dogs man's best friend. Not really. Right? A dog, as friendly and cute and fluffy as they may be, is never going to be what this passage describes as, for Adam there was no fit helper found. That word fit, or you could say matching or corresponding, a dog is not a fit, matching, corresponding helper for a man. Sure, they can be nice and fluffy and friendly and maybe pull a sled if you train them well enough, or play fetch, but they can't talk to you. They can't have a real relationship with the man. And so you can imagine Adam, as he's performing his God-given duty, naming all of these animals, he's watching the animals paraded past him, and he says, oh, look, a boy giraffe and a girl giraffe, and oh, a boy elephant and a girl elephant, and boy dog and a girl dog. God, how come all of these animals have their mates and I'm alone here? And he probably would be the first person who has ever thought that he would be forever alone. And yet, God is preparing him in this scene to fully appreciate what a precious gift it is that he's about to receive, because God is going to prepare for him, just like for these animals who each have their mate. God is about to prepare a suitable mate for him. Suitable meaning perfectly matched, meaning appropriate. Just like if you're going to fix something, if you're going to do a task, you need the appropriate tool. Well, if you have a tool that's even a little bit off, it's not going to function properly, right? I drive a 2010 Sonata out there, and you may have noticed that a couple of the door handles are different color than the paint of the rest of the car. That's because the door handles on that car are apparently very flimsy. I've broken 2 of them. My door froze in the winter, and in pulling to kind of yank the door open from the ice, I managed to snap a door handle clean off. And did you know that when you're trying to replace that door handle, it's actually kind of like annoying. I decided to do this finally in the middle of summer. I was out in a Home Depot parking lot, and you have to open up the door, pull off a little tiny panel on the inside, and then there's about this much door panel before you get to this tiny screw. And it's all dark in there, so you got to shine a flashlight, see on the end of that screw, okay, is this a Phillips or a flathead? No, it's a hex. Okay, so I'm going to need a ratchet. So I got to go into Home Depot, get a socket set that I don't have. It says a 7 on the end, so I go get a 7 socket, trying to reach, okay, no, it's not long enough. It's not going to reach that hex. So I got to go back in. I've got to get the extra long 7 hex, and so I go back in and get that. Come back out. I'm starting to sweat. It's about 100 degrees that day. And I can feel the hex on there. I can kind of get it. It's just one screw that you need to unscrew to change the whole door handle, and then it just pops in, and the 7's not fitting. So eventually I bought an entire set of socket wrenches, because I'll use them for something anyway. But, you know, all of those tools that I bought weren't doing the job. I needed one specific length, specific size, and then once I had the right socket, really easy. It took about a minute to pop the thing off, pop the new handle on, and my door is good as new. But if you don't have that perfectly matched thing, you're not going to be able to perform the task right. If Adam doesn't have a perfectly corresponding, fit, matching mate, he's not going to function the way that God intended. The King James Version actually translates that word as helpmeet. It's not a word that we use a lot, but the word that's translated there, helper or helpmeet, you get the sense of someone who meets you with the appropriate help that you need. It's usually referring to help that comes from God, and yet here in this passage, the helper that Adam needs is the woman, providing what he doesn't have in himself. He needs her for companionship. It's the same kind of help that God provides, and so you can imagine that it's kind of like Goldilocks, except without the trial and error, right? One was too hard, one was too soft, but this one is just right. Eve is tailor-made for Adam, just right. There's no trying it out. Well, let's see, maybe we'll make her furry like the dog and see if you like that, or, we'll make her have a really long neck like a giraffe, see if that works out for you. No, it's perfectly corresponding. The first time out, God provides exactly suitable help for Adam to fulfill his destiny. God designed the man, Adam, to flourish and fulfill his purpose only in community. And he's incomplete. He's unable to fully realize God's command to be fruitful and multiply without that community. God designed humans on a fundamental level for relationships. That is the need. And so now we see that as soon as God identifies that need, he immediately provides exactly what is needed. So let's talk about that provision for a moment. So Adam needs a helper. He needs someone who corresponds to him in a way that the animals don't. He needs a spouse. So what is God going to do to remedy this situation? Well, he puts Adam under, and God performs the very first surgery of all of history. He is going to tailor-make a woman exactly fit for Adam. So he takes some of that same material, and the process from then on has been the same, hasn't it? The genetic recombination of taking material from two parents in order to make a new individual of the same kind, one who is made of their same stuff, who is their kin, taking parts of those parents to make the child. Right? This shows that mankind, we didn't come by gradual change from the apes. Adam and Eve here, this story in chapter 2 is not a metaphor. We're not talking about the first pair of hominoids that crossed some threshold of self-awareness. The Bible's very clear. Adam is made handcrafted by God from the earth, and Eve is made handcrafted by God from Adam's rib. God is personally involved here. There's craftsmanship. He's getting his hands dirty. There's intentionality, not accident. And the result of this intentional act by God is two individuals, Adam and Eve, who are organically related to each other, fully human, fully bearing his image, fully related to each other and to all of the rest of us. The result is relationships, a human community. Now you might be thinking, why the rib? That seems like a pretty odd thing. Why doesn't God just create Eve out of the dust like he did for Adam? Or why doesn't he just speak Eve into existence the same way that he did the animals and the other living things? Why a rib in particular? That seems strange. The 19th century commentator who wrote a very thick commentary on the whole Bible, Matthew Henry, says it really well, and all of the other commentators like to quote him on this because it's such a great line. But when he's talking about why the rib, he says, why the rib, not made out of his head to top him, nor out of his feet to be trampled upon by him, but out of his side to be equal with him, under his arm to be protected, and near his heart to be beloved. And as God creates this perfectly matched woman from the rib, think about the resulting compatibility that the two have in this first human relationship. Remember, they are both perfect. They are both innocent at this point. There is no sin in the world. She has the image of God just as Adam does, in a way that the animals do not bear it. That is why she alone is perfectly compatible with Adam, and they are not. She's intellectually, conversationally, emotionally, in terms of her capabilities, the perfect complement to Adam. And more importantly, she is exactly that, a complement. God did not create another man. The word literally means opposite. If God intended to say another of the same kind, that would be a different word. And so we see here that God intended to make another who is in many ways the opposite of Adam. In other words, she is going to use and express that image of God, that rationality, that emotion, that God-likeness from a unique perspective. She's going to emphasize different aspects of it than the man will. In other words, in their complementing and not being exactly identical to one another, there is harmony. Right? To create harmony, you need something that is similar but not identical, something that is parallel. If you have two notes that are identical, you have a unity, not harmony, and it's just flat. It's not as interesting. And yet you have the man and the woman created specifically, not identically, to exist in a relationship of harmony and intimacy. All of those compatibility tests that you've taken for those dating sites online, all of those are possible only on the very basic foundation that you probably don't think of very much, but all of them are assuming that you are dating another human being and not a tree, right? You don't have to go into those compatibility tests and say, well, I would like someone with 2 eyes and a nose and 1 mouth, and I don't want them to have a mane like a lion, or I don't want them to have very sharp teeth because that might be dangerous for me. You know, they have to walk upright. All of that is obvious. All of that goes into the equation at the basic assumption level because other humans are compatible with us for relationship in a way that the animals aren't. The compatibility has to do with the level of the soul, which animals don't possess. We are co-bearers of God's likeness. God's image is what makes you a relational being in the first place that's capable of these types of family relationships. And people talk about dolphins communicate. Dolphins have family relationships. But ours goes beyond a herd mentality or an instinct. We are capable of love in a way that no one would suggest a dolphin is. Furthermore, we see in this passage that Adam and Eve are bone relatives. They're a perfect match. That's a Hebraism where, in English we would probably say people are blood relatives. Well, in Hebrew they say you are bone relatives. And the words used for man and woman there are ish and isha. Hebrew names things in order to highlight their closeness. So we see that God named Adam in order to highlight his relationship to the ground. He took him out of the dust of the earth, and so he gives him a similar name to the ground, Adam and Adamah. That's what God names Adam. And yet Adam names himself not in relationship to the earth, but in relationship to his wife, the woman Eve. That is his most important defining relationship. I was recently at the wedding of a friend, a seminary buddy who I used to live with, and his father has also taken some classes, so there was a good amount of seminarians at this wedding, but without explaining that he was about to use a Hebrew term, the father of the groom just said, you've finally found your ish. And I'm sure everybody there, thought, did he just call him the Ish? What? Like, this is very inappropriate for a wedding. But no, this perfect relationship, this closeness of man and woman, Ish and Isha, that relationship is intended to be close, perfectly corresponding, and intimately related, graciously gifted partner, that they are defined by their relationship to one another. We also see, on a little bit of a side note here, that genders are the definitive norm in this chapter. There's that explicit statement from God in verse 27 that he created them male and female. So marriage is the norm and the source of goodness here in this passage, but also we can say that the trans agenda that's getting so much traction in the media and social media and politics right now is a tragic confusion of what God has intended. It takes the fact of brokenness, that we live in a broken world where there are such tragic things as intersex mutations, where people have some combined anatomy of both sides, or one or the other doesn't function properly. It takes tragic things like that, or the fact of mental illness and dysphoric identity disorder, and it makes those tragedies the standard or the norm rather than what they are by definition, abnormal, the result of living in a cursed, broken world. Maleness and femaleness are appropriate, not because they are a cultural thing that we invented and impose on people, but because of God's design. God created them male and female to complement each other. You hear in the root of that word, complementary, that you complete me. There's a sense of male and female being like a lock and a key. They're intended to fit together, and in fact, they require one another to display their full intention and meaning. Without one another, they are useless. A lock and a lock, or a key and a key, can only behave interchangeably if one of them is terribly deformed in some way and is no longer functioning as it was intended to. You would not look at a broken key and conclude, see, the whole concept of locks and keys are abnormal, so we should scrap this whole system. We rightly recognize the tragedy of such a situation and the need for compassion, for the deep spiritual pain that people who struggle with trans issues go through. But it is just that, a tragedy that requires compassion, not a freedom to be celebrated. Also, this passage implies that sexual intimacy within marriage is basically good. It's implied here. The actual fruitful and multiply will be culminated later on in chapter 3 when Adam and Eve have their first son, Cain. Christians, very often we get a bad rap for being prudish or Victorian or sexually repressed. And, maybe some Christians have taught that type of thing, that all sex and all sexual desire is bad and dirty and to be avoided. But the Bible says not so. Simply saying that this is one and only one context where it's appropriate to express sexuality is not the same as saying that all sex is bad or evil. It's actually appropriate and life-giving in the proper context. Two opposite-gendered people joined together by God for life is the only appropriate context where it becomes good and life-giving. Go read Song of Solomon for a celebration in biblical words, scriptural celebration of marital bliss and sexual love. It's a good thing. And, for now, I remember before I got married and I was a teenager once, and a teenage boy especially, I know for most of you living in our hyper-sexualized culture, to hold up that ideal of sex and sexual satisfaction only in marriage, It may feel like you almost wish that the Bible condemned all sex drive, because it can feel like you have to kind of keep this lion caged up, right? Especially if you've been taught that, really good Christians are totally asexual and chaste, and they don't have any roaring lion of a sex drive to speak of. So now not only do you feel like I've got this lion that I'm trying to keep in a cage until the proper time, but now I've got to keep this lion quiet as well, because nobody else has lions and I'm the only one. And I've got to make sure nobody finds out that I've got this lion I'm trying to keep in a cage. It seems impossible at times. But the Bible tells us that drive is a good thing. It's something that God invented. He designed it, and therefore it can be tamed and kept in control. It's there because it promotes intimacy. It increases the relationship, and therefore it's a good thing. Sex is meant by God to be the marital glue. It's meant to bind two people together on a psycho-physical level. It has that binding power, and so it's not inherently dirty. Well, to sum up this section, what is this passage saying? God says you need other people. Relationships are good. They are good for you. And for most of you, therefore, it will be to your benefit to seek a spouse, just as Adam does, to fulfill his destiny. A couple pitfalls and cautions. We can fall into the trap of idolizing marriage very easily. I know especially a lot of Christians are prone to that, where we begin to see marriage as the solution to all of our problems, and it almost becomes our savior. Oh man, if I'm married, I won't have to struggle with lust anymore. I'll have someone there for me all the time. I won't be lonely anymore. And marriage begins to take on this larger-than-life position where it becomes the solution to all of our problems. The idolizing of marriage is not any holier than the idolizing of sexual pleasure outside of marriage. Although in this passage, marriage is foregrounded and it's important, it is never ultimate. And so we need not make that mistake of making marriage ultimate in our lives. Other relationships outside of marriage matter also. We remember that Jesus was a lifelong bachelor, and he did not die from not being married. Maybe you feel like Adam watching all of those pairs of animals parade along, each with their mate, and feeling like you're forever alone. I know, it's rough. It can be very isolating. Feelings of loneliness can drive us into grave sin if we let them. Think back to our singleness seminar if you were there. You need to fill that void for now until God brings your spouse along in his wise timing. You need to fill that void with deliberate, thoughtful, fulfilling friendships. Don't further isolate yourself. That only makes it harder. You need to take this time and relish the opportunity to feed more deeply on Christ. Jesus clearly made those kinds of non-married relationships a deep priority in his own life, sharing of himself with others, and 12 in particular, in an appropriate way. Deep friendships are one of the most Christ-like things that you can have in your life. Notice also that marriage never supersedes Adam's direct relationship with God in this passage. Jesus is able to enjoy such fellowship with others. Adam is able to enjoy such fellowship with Eve, the only other at that point, only because they first have that fellowship with God. And in fact, you can see how the infiltration of sin into this vertical relationship between Adam and Eve immediately has disastrous effects on the horizontal. You can't have good and godly friendships unless this vertical relationship with God is right first. Another pitfall is that gender roles are biblical as a concept. We said that there is a difference between men and women. They're not interchangeable. But the details, for the most part, are culturally conditioned. And so the errors of chauvinism and patriarchy and feminism, all of them miss the mark, and we want to make sure that we steer clear of all of them. Right? Even the kind of gender confusion that drives some of this trans agenda as a reaction, much of those cultural things that agenda is reacting against are in fact unbiblically restrictive. People say, I feel like the opposite gender because I have bought into this lie that my culture tells that certain behaviors are only appropriate for a certain gender, right? So the culture tells me I'm a man, I have to behave in a certain way. I don't want to behave that way, therefore I feel like I have to become a woman to behave in that way and be accepted, and therefore I feel like a woman. That is the basic thinking. Rather, people say, to live that way I need to change my identity. No, it's the roles that are too rigid and need to change, not the identity. The role needs to be more flexible, not the identity. We need to acknowledge the Bible insists that differences do exist, but it doesn't tell us very much detail of what those differences are, beyond that God created them male and female, except in a few specific areas. So let's not sinfully stretch that to fit our preconceived cultural notions. Men should work, women should clean, or whatever have you. I know those have changed over time, and I think that they've developed in a healthier way, but there's still a long way to go. God says that there's a time and a place and a manner within which He blesses relationships, and we need to respect His terms and His intentions as the inventor of man and woman for our good. It's like the instruction manual. When I was in kindergarten, one of the first things that they told us is, don't stick the scissor in the electrical socket. So, of course, the first thing that I did during movie night was stick the scissor in the electrical socket, and it made a big poof, and there was smoke, and I blamed it on one of my classmates, and she didn't have friends for the rest of middle school and elementary school. Sorry, Emily. That was me. But, right? Why? Because you're defying the basic instructions. It's dangerous. If you use something against how it was intended, you're not going to improve on the design. You're only going to hurt yourself. That's what the Bible is here for. God is giving us, this is how I've designed you. This is how you can flourish. This is how you can function the way that you're supposed to. So follow my instructions and don't try to make it up as you go along. You're only going to hurt yourself. But then lastly, we see as God perfectly provides what is needed for Adam to have his perfect mate, we see that the result is the shalom that can only come from God. The gospel is clearest through relationships. Love is existential. It's not abstract. You can't talk about it. You can't read about it in a science textbook. You can only experience it to know what love is. 1 John tells us that, beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. And so to know by experience that God is love requires a community. Some of you struggle to analyze and to think through whether God loves you or whether you love God at any given moment, and that is something that really torments you. Do I love God enough? Well, it's not an analytical thing. Just love each other and allow others through their concrete love, through your relationships, to show you what the love of God is like. Eve is there to create this relationship of mutual honor and love, which is a reflection on and a reminder of God's invisible but unchanging love. Jesus with flesh on, so to speak, as a pastor friend of mine likes to say, sometimes we need Jesus with flesh on. I mean, yes, Jesus still has his resurrection body in heaven at the right hand of the Father, but we can't see him right now. So the point still stands that sometimes we need other people, relationships, to show us what the love of Jesus is really like in a way that we can touch and feel and smell. You are, in a sense, to be Jesus to each other by how you love one another, how you do relationships. Notice at the end of the chapter that we read, Adam's hymn of praise, it focuses on Eve's unique beauty and glory. Now, at last, finally, this is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. And, you have to think, this is perfect, sinless beauty in every possible way that Adam is looking at as he says that. You and I, we have never seen such a perfect, amazing, flawless human specimen as Adam looking on the beauty of Eve before there was any sin or darkness in the world. You hear that term, right? When someone works out a lot, someone will come along and say, oh man, that person really is a specimen. Like they're a perfect specimen. And yet, in the case of Eve, it is as true as it's ever been. She is the definition of human perfection. And some people are aware in their own relationships that maybe their partner is far more perfect than they are. And so you'll hear even non-believers say things like, oh, I'm so lucky. And that echoes Adam's hymn of praise, like, this is amazing, God. She is so perfect for me. I don't deserve this. Now, at last, finally, and he celebrates that. Well, I prefer not to say I'm so lucky. I prefer to say that I am so blessed to have my wife who is my perfect, tailor-made partner exactly for me. And yet, the difference between I'm so lucky and I'm so blessed is the recognition that this is a gift. That this is something that is intentionally given to me from my loving Father so that I can know him better, so that I can understand just how much he loves me. Because ultimately, Adam's hymn, rightly focused on Eve though it is, points back to the source in God's gracious provision. Because who is it that brought this beautiful Eve to him like 2 seconds ago? It's God. God makes what is already good even better for the sake of his children whom he loves and to fulfill his good plans for them. And look at the shalom that they have in this relationship, praising and enjoying one another, a mutual enjoyment, a deep fulfillment of that need for relationship that's built into who they are, their destiny, finding that in one another blissfully. And the last verse of the chapter says that they were naked and unashamed. That's what everyone craves, isn't it? To be fully known, to be fully naked and exposed, and yet for all of your flaws and all of your whatever, to be fully accepted as you are. Isn't that what we're all looking for in a relationship? For someone to know everything about you, even the stuff that you don't like very much, and to fully accept everything about you. To be completely vulnerable and yet completely safe. See, human relationships, all of them, marriages, friendships, whatever, are all meant to point us to the most ultimate relationship with God, the source of all love. God is love, as that verse from 1 John said. He's not only this far off, distant, unknowable, transcendent God, but he is an immanent God who loves us. Because he's clothed himself in flesh, he's become fully like us in the person of his Son, Jesus Christ. And so our relationships point us to Jesus as the source of our shalom, of our completeness. Because just like Adam and Eve are able to celebrate and delight in one another in their nakedness and unashamedness, Jesus sees us. Scripture says somewhere that everything is exposed and naked before him to whom we will all have to give an account. Nothing is hidden from God's eyes. He knows us as we are. He knows the skeletons in our closets. He knows the deep, dark secrets. He knows everything. And just like we'll see very quickly in the next chapter, the incident with the fig leaves, Adam will learn very soon that as sinners we have very much to hide, to keep covered up, to let nobody know about. And yet, God sees through our fig leaves. God still sees our nakedness. We can't hide anything from him. And he fully accepts us completely, with no reservations, in his beloved Son. In Jesus, just as in the garden, there is no shame. We can be naked and unashamed because we're covered in his righteousness as the ultimate peace-giving, completeness-giving relationship that we're made for. It's not as we are that he accepts us. People say God accepts you as you are. No, God accepts you in spite of who you are. In spite of your sinful ruin and brokenness, he sees you as you should have been. As that perfect, sinless, glorious, beautiful man and woman of God. And that is who you can be again because of Christ. So these relationships, your future marriages, your deepest lifelong friendships, your church, your life groups, all of it points to our greatest good, the fullness of human shalom, fulfillment and completeness and love in Jesus. So be fulfilled, be fully human, do relationship well, and find your shalom in him.